Okay, Sarah Pink, thank you very much for spending a few minutes to talk to us. I wondered whether I could ask you about how I might go about designing a visual research project for myself, and what help you would give me if I was a starter student.
Well, I guess you probably come to me if you wanted to do a research project that involves some kind of visual ethnographic methods, because that's the area that I specialise in. As a student, I would want you to come. I prefer you to come to me with a particular project in mind. Sometimes students come to me without a project in mind. They don't quite know what they want to do yet. But obviously, if you're going to use visual methods, the whole idea is that if you're going to develop a project, then you choose the methods that are most appropriate for that project. In some cases, I may tell you that you don't need to use visual methods at all.
What sort of cases would they be?
There may be projects in which it's just not appropriate to film people, to take photographs of them, that they might not feel comfortable. Culturally, it might not be appropriate. It might not add anything to the type of knowledge that you're generating, or it may make people feel more uncomfortable than comfortable. Often we'll start off a project with an idea of the methods that we'd like to use, but once we start to engage much more deeply with the people we're doing the research with, then we'll find that actually the methods that we originally thought of using are really not particularly appropriate, they won't work, or the technology we thought we'd use is not the right technology for those people. And one of the main examples I use is that when I started my PhD research, I thought I was going to be doing a lot of video recording, having trained in documentary, anthropological documentary making, but once I arrived in southern Spain where I was doing the research, I realised that nobody was really video recording one another. It wasn't part of the local visual culture and practice, at least in the bullfighting world where I was doing my research. But I found that everybody was photographing. Different people would take different types of photographs depending on what they were interested in. And one of the ways for me to participate in what they were doing as a researcher and also learn how they saw their world was by trying to take photographs in the same way that they took photographs. So sometimes we plan methods when we get to do the research, especially in ethnography, because as we know when we do ethnography, often the research question shifts or it changes as the project develops. So sometimes the methods have to be flexible and respond to the project, respond to the research participants, so what they feel comfortable with, but also to what best supports them in helping you to produce knowledge or producing knowledge with them.
And what do I get from visual data that I don't get from other sources of data as a researcher?
I think you can potentially get a series of different things. You might not get all of them in every project. And the most fundamental, most obvious is that you get a visual, and not depending on what media you're using, not just visual. I mean, we talk about visual research and visual ethnography. If we're using video, it's audio-visual anyway. But the first thing you would get by using photography or video in research would be a visual or audio-visual record of some kind of part of the research process. I always think of images as being produced out of a research encounter. So they represent that research encounter, they represent that moment at which particular ways of knowing about another person's experience and particular experiences as an ethnographer actually emerge and actually come into being. And video especially is very interesting in that sense because it can enable us to take ourselves back into the research situation by reviewing video and to imagine ourselves back into that context and maybe realise new things that we didn't realise in that particular very brief kind of moment of doing research. And then, for example, in an hour-long video you might go back to re-experience and rethink that whole research encounter. Had you just scribbled down some notes at the end, you wouldn't have been able to return and then scribble down your notes when you're watching the video.
So interesting in terms of secondary data, you can almost be another researcher and almost be back there at the moment of...
You could almost be another researcher. That raises questions about how you might go about sharing data as part of a collaborative project in which maybe several researchers are working on, because we obviously can't experience other people's experiences. If it's your own, what I found by looking at my own video research materials is that even 10 years later, I can almost feel like I'm back there again, and it invites the production of memories and rethinking about how you felt when you were there and what you learned, and really can take you back into an analysis which is, I suppose, more empathetic with both your own experiences when you were there and the experiences of the person you're learning about or doing research with. I think for sharing materials with other researchers, I think it offers those sorts of possibilities because the very nature of audio-visual materials is that it invites you to imagine the embodied experience of the person that you're viewing. So even if you weren't the researcher, it can take you or invite you to visit or imagine yourself in that place that's represented on video. But one of the other aspects of that is that if you are sharing data with other researchers, then it's useful to have some kind of annotation, some kind of introduction, some kind of way to help the people that you're working with to use those materials in ways that kind of correspond with your experience of being the researcher. But then there are also other ways in which other researchers might want to use those materials as well to actually do a different type of analysis. So it invites collaborative research that actually goes across methods, so from visual ethnography to maybe another method that would analyse and treat video in a quite different way.
Thank you, Sarah.
Okay.